Good morning, everybody. Today is the fifth day in the month of April 2022. My name is Heritage Adisa, market analyst at Hotforex. Quickly, as usual, we'll check through the market, find out what the overall sentiment is, what the big stories are, big drivers are, if they provide opportunities, and then how we can take advantage of it. But please remember that this is just a communication material, and nothing in this communication should be considered as investment advice or investment recommendation. Users acknowledge that investment in FX and CFD products is characterized by a certain degree of uncertainty, and that any investment of this nature involves a high level of risk for which users are solely responsible and liable. Now, what we have this morning in terms of the overall market environment is more mixed flow, mixed start to the day in terms of the overall sentiment. You look at how the equities are trading, mostly tentative, some of them down, some of them flat. Generally we don't have that. We have more of a disjointed, move this morning. But most of the big stories this morning, we had the RBA rate meeting, overnight. Yes, they didn't change the interest rate, but they tilted more hawkish, highlighting the resilient economy, highlighting increase in spending, strong labor market, strong household spending generally, and even business spending as well, right, which was also good. More importantly, before now, they've always been saying that they'll be patient in trying to tighten policies, right? But in this particular statement, they dropped the word patient, which more or less signals to markets that they're they're considering, tighter policies even faster, and a lot of traders have started to, price, a lot of market participants started to price in even faster rate hikes, and that saw the AUD jump up across board this morning. Apart from that, we also had comments from BOJ Governor Kuroda, where he more or less just jawboned, the currency, saying that they're watching the FX rate and JPY has fallen, a little bit too fast, like a little too rapidly, clearly talking about intervention. So those talks as well also put a little bit of strength, a little bit of, reprieve in the weakness we've seen in JPY for a while now. So we've seen JPY pick up a little bit of strength in today's session. So far, AUD leads the majors. The NZD is also doing well this morning. On the other hand, you have weakness in the euros, just slight marginal weakness in the euro, slight marginal weakness in the US dollar as well. Equities, like I said, trading mostly weak to start the day. Yes, US side are mostly flat, so not really doing so much to there for us to work with. US 100 is mostly net on change, zero net on change, or zero net change rather. On the oil side, oil prices continue to hold on to gains, because as more and more tensions from Russia remains, tensions from Europe generally, and then Europe mulling over more sanctions on Russia. Clearly, that means that it could even get worse. It could get even, worse going forward, and then that's really bad for Europe, and then good for oil prices because it more or less says the supply is even going to be tighter even going forward. So clearly that has seen oil prices jump up twice this session. Today's session did not really, continue that momentum, but they're still trading mostly in just keeping to the gains, right, from yesterday. The VIX is mostly unchanged, not really done any much so far today, as US 500 has also not done so much. So there's also that. On the US dollar index, just a little bit off the highs in today's session, but overall, the dollar has been strong. So clearly, the dollar index overall, all things considered, have still been high. I said looking for strength in the AUD is the way to go. Right, number one, RBA provides support for the currency. Apart from that, sanctions in against Russia also supports commodity prices generally, which is good for the Australian dollar as a commodity currency. And finally, weakness in the euro is still one that's found very interesting as well, because sanctions clearly remains negative for the single currency. In the day ahead, it's going to be a couple of PMIs out, but most importantly, US ISM services PMI would be the key point in today's session. Looking across, the equity space, for example, we talked about equities, mostly on the Asian side, mostly down. You look at Japanese index, mostly down, now back up as well. You look at German 40 as well, was down, now up. So we're seeing that overall up and down tentative moves, across the equity space as well. So that doesn't really give us a tilt towards any side of the sentiment. But for now, you look across to the US side, you notice that mostly flat moves. Now starting to pick up a bit, but that's how we started the session mostly flat, and that hasn't really given us so much of confidence. Over the last couple of days, we've really had such choppy moves. So I'm not really looking to be drawn into the current sentiments that we have right now. But yesterday we talked about a couple of pairs. We mentioned a couple of pairs against the Japanese yen, JPY crosses. Let me just really do like a quick recap of what we looked out for and what it looks like, or how it played out in today's session. Just quickly. Yesterday we talked about CAD JPY. We remember talking about AUD JPY as well, and we also talked about NZD JPY. What's that one? NZD JPY. Good. Where we said we're looking for upside in those particular pairs. And then we marked out a couple of levels that we said were going to be interesting for us. Now, just looking at how it played out in yesterday's session, these are the levels that we said we would not like to jump in unless we saw, upside or a breakout of these levels, right? We'd like to see a breakout of these levels before we look to get into any one of that. Now we've had that currency session. Yesterday we didn't really get it. It was more of a slow day like we expected it to be on some of these currency pairs. But looking at, more importantly, AUD JPY, we talked about that level as an interesting one to pay attention to, where we said we needed to see a breakout of this level in yesterday's session, where we are currently trading at as at the morning period. And we eventually had it. Now we pulled back to that region as well in today's session. And then the RBA was the catalyst we needed, right? There was the catalyst we needed to really push this higher, right? And then we broke out, we came back to retested yesterday's early session highs as well as Friday's high, right? And then we pushed higher as well in today's session. We look at NZD JPY as well. We also talked about this in yesterday's session where we said, this level that we're looking at here was also an interesting one to pay attention to. And we wouldn't like to buy this unless we see, a breakout of this particular level, right? And then eventually we got what we're looking out for, right? It didn't really happen yesterday's session. Yesterday was mostly slow, but eventually we had that breakout, that pull breakout of the level, and now we're up here as well in today's session. We also had this particular level also in mind yesterday. I think it was the overhead one, but we also had one, in the short term. Just quickly, just to recap it, where we also talked about this 85.000 level here as well. Also an interesting one as well. Yesterday we had just a slight break above it, slight pullback towards it, and then push higher. Most of the time, when you've already done your analysis, your research, and you have your idea of what you want to do on your chart, you just need to wait out for a clearer, opportunity to really go into what you want to go into the trade idea that you have. AUD as well. Now in today's session, and that just quick technical setup that I just want to just show us before we head off. We looked at this. I had a couple of levels marked on this particular one, and you see how the technicals just lined up cleanly in today's session. For example, you look at the highs on AUD USD, for example, right? Previous highs over the last couple of days. Yesterday's session we broke above it. We came back to test it early into the session, very close, and then the RBA was the catalyst, and then we jumped higher. You look at Euro USD, another similar story there. Right now, in this particular one, right? So we had this level as well, this round number around 1.45500. Also an interesting one there. The lows going back to 28th of March. And we broke below it yesterday session, we pulled back to it, and then we broke far lower from it again into this session. You look at one other one, AUD versus JPY, just quick one, because all these technical setups are things that we can always, pay attention to when we trade. You look at this point as well. This is already in hindsight, but just to quickly show us so we can learn a little bit from it. You look here as well. This was also an interesting one to pay attention to, right? The lows, right? High, and then eventually we broke above it in yesterday's session. We pulled back to it, and the RBA, the catalyst, and then from there we pushed high, and so on and so forth. It just keeps getting better and better across, across all of the assets that we looked out for, coming from yesterday, even in today's session. So that was interesting for us to pay attention to. In today's session, how would I like to play this? Strength in AUD is still a way to look out to go. I would like to see it against the likes of the euro. That means for the downside on this particular one. But where we are moving right now is really stretched. So I wouldn't want to be caught selling at such low levels. If I can get pullbacks, in this case, it's really, really low. So I think this one has really just sailed. I mean, there's nothing that I want to leverage on going back so far. The last time we had these levels was way back in, 2021. Let's go back and see. I mean, way back in 2017. So, I mean, it's really tricky to try and sell at levels like this. But considering the current sentiment, if we could get a pullback, maybe to S1 around 1.445, maybe we'll be interested in looking at that. Or maybe the 50 moving average I have here also pulls down, and then I can really get a retest anywhere coinciding with this particular levels here. Maybe I'll be interested in that particular one, looking for the downside. You look at AUD JPY, also interesting one in terms of today's session, but where they're currently trading at the highs, if we could get pullbacks, maybe pullbacks towards this highs here around the 93.00. Maybe, that would be interesting for me. But in terms of the moves, they're stretched already, and it's a little bit tricky, trying to jump into what we have. The euro is another one I want to also still look out for generally. In terms of weakness in the euro, based on what we have going on for us right now, what I'd really like to see on the euro front would be weakness in the euro against the likes of the CAD, for example, considering the fact that we have those tensions should support oil prices, as well as against the AUD, although the AUD is a little bit stretched right now, even against the NZD as well. Euro CAD, now looking at this one, I prefer this one because there's still not so much, in terms of the move that we've seen so far in today's session. There's still room to move into this session, although we're also trading at the lows right here. So it just makes it a little bit tricky in terms of entry timing into this session. So if we could, break below this, we test this level, then I would like to see further downside on this particular pair Euro CAD. Look at Euro NZD finally. Also something I want to look out for as well, but in this case, I like to see a pullback towards 1.575, previous lows going back to 28th of March as well as the 23rd of March. Anything back to that region would be interesting, and then further downside from there would not be a bad idea. On the calendar, it's a couple of PMIs expected in today's session. Across board, a couple of PMIs in Europe, right? But most importantly, we have the ISM Services PMI, which will be interesting as well for today's session. Good data obviously shows stronger economy in the US, and then should be good for the US dollar, even though it shouldn't change, the overall stance of the Federal Reserve so far. But is that to pay attention to, and then we can look at that going forward. So that's it for now. Thank you very much. If you have any questions, please do not hesitate to ask, and we'll always do our best to help. Thank you. Do enjoy the rest of the training session. Bye for now.